you want to maybe dive into all the cool things about the new book?
Sure.
And I'll go ahead and
I
share.
also want to talk a little bit how we got to this point in time. I think you've done a pretty good job in describing 142 sites as opposed to, I think, 98 back in 2008. The page count has gone way up to, what is it? It's over 400 pages now, as opposed to, was it 298, something like that in the very first edition. But I also ought to give a nod and shout out to Mick because he's joined us. There wouldn't be a new book unless he had been so persistent in pursuing the project over the dozen years. We would let the whole issue rest for a year or two, and then he would call or come by and say, we really ought to do a new edition. And I was all for that, except that it's a lot of work. But Mick was so persistent that we decided about Derek, 3 years ago to dive in and do it again. But we wanted to do it in a little bit different way. We knew we could add more sites. In fact, adding sites has never been a problem. One of the interesting sidebars to the whole process was our designer kept warning us how big the book was getting and warning us that we couldn't add any more sites, and we kept adding more and more. And I'm convinced that a third edition, we could probably go to from 142 to easily 175, but it will take a lot of persuading to move me to another edition. In any event, Mick, we are in your for having persevered and having gotten us to this far. And of course, I guess perhaps the most obvious thing is simply the size of the book. The first book was 8.5 by 11, the size of an ordinary piece of paper that you put in your computer. And this new book, by comparison, is obviously much larger. Some people have said it's not only a coffee table book, but it's the whole damn coffee table. But I think it turned out well. We were blessed by a great designer, as you can see by the cover, for example, who's taken the old photograph, the then photograph, and blended it with the new one, almost to the point where it's very difficult, except where you see the color turning to black and white, to tell what the differences are. So a book is made by the contents, to be sure, but also the presentation of those contents. And we were really blessed in having our designer be so effective in presenting our work. So, Derek, you want to take it away from there?
Yeah, we can dive in.
Unless Mick would like to make some comments about his perseverance.
Well, I have to say, and I don't know if any of you that are out there listening to us have ever done a project like this, but what we did on the first edition was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. And I couldn't wait to try to do it again with you, Jim. And of course, we're so glad that Derek joined us in the second edition. It was just a lot of fun. And I tell everybody at every talk, and I'm sorry, Derek, for stealing some of your time here, but we in this book we brought you some great pictures. A lot of them from the Estes Park Historical Museum, the historic ones, and Derek took the lion's share then of the nows because life just prohibited me from joining that often. But so we brought you the pictures and Jim's awesome historic, discussions of all these sites and everything. What we couldn't bring you are the experiences that we had. I wish there was a way that we could encapsulate those experiences and put them in the book and share them with you as well. And that's
really a great point. That's a great point, Mick, because it was a great deal of fun doing the book. And especially for me, not only because of you guys and what good friends you were and some of the experiences we had, which now pass into very fond memories, but because otherwise doing history is a pretty lonely undertaking. I sit here in my study with a bunch of papers, notes and stuff and try to put it all together. But to actually go out into the field and see the places where history has taken place is really a lot of fun. And yes, there was great fellowship in the doing.
All
Yeah,
right, well,
I couldn't agree
back to you,
more.
dear. Thank you.
I'd echo that too. And you're not stealing my time. This is our time, just like it's our book. So you can pipe in whenever you want. But yeah, I mean, it's a great experience, of course, with you guys. And the other catalyst behind this was, we wanted a major fundraiser to help out with our collections facility that we are in dire needs of, a new one, and something that will really protect these artifacts. And so it was great to be able to produce a book that's based off of the majority of photos from our collection, where all the proceeds of this book are not going to Jim or myself or Mick. They're going back to the Friends of the Museum so that they can go ahead and help us with this collections and research facility. And so it was a great project to do. I feel like, Jim is the historian laureate, knew where a lot of these sites were, which were great. Mick is definitely a much better photographer than I am, and could really get some good photos. And then I was kind of the middleman that just kept pushing the project to make sure we actually finished it at some point in time. And like Jim is saying, it did take us a couple of years. And a lot of that was due to not only because there's a lot that goes into making a book, but also because if you don't get the photos you want in one summer, you can't just go out and shoot them in the wintertime. You have to wait for the next summer if you want it to really look good. So it was a long endeavor. So the book is available. It's $59.95 plus tax. There's shipping available for an extra $10, and they can be more than likely delivered within the Estes Park area here. And the best way to get it is online, of course, right now with the gallery being closed. On top of that, if you are a member, a Friends member, you do get a 10% discount. And right now, if you become a new member or you renew your membership to get that 10% discount, you do get a mask with the museum logo on it too. So I talked my family into posing for that picture there at the bottom. So that are some of the background of the book. We're hoping people do engage with us. I would definitely like to have these be more conversations than just presentations. So ask us questions. Plus, we've done this a few times. So sometimes we leave out stories or details of how we do this. And so any questions you have, ask throughout it. Michaela, who introduced us, will be moderating it and answer or ask us those questions on behalf of the audience. And we'll just go ahead and dive in, I think. So we're going to be focusing on the lodges. And Mick and I kind of divided up the photos here. So I definitely wanted to start with this one. It's one of his, but being more of the professional photographer, knowing a lot more about photography, he can explain some of the elements, especially with the juxtaposition of these two photos. But Jim's going to give us context on most of the historical sites, and then Mick and I will dive in and give some of the kind of the cues that we took or the things that we learned from revisiting those sites. So back to you, Jim.
Okay, I really like this photograph. It's taken, as you can see, from the lower right-hand corner by F.E. Baker, Frank Baker. He was a photographer in Greeley. Unfortunately, we don't know much about him other than he was up here in the 1880s, and the early 1880s from this particular photograph, because the Estes Park Hotel, the Earl of Dunraven's hotel, was opened in 1877, and this is a very early view of that hotel. The reason I like the photograph and the picture, not only because of the subject, but because of the then and now aspects. You notice these three rocks right down in the front. We were able to find those. They look relatively close to the hotel building, but actually they're below the 11th tee on the Estes Park golf course. And being a golfer, I never go by without taking a look at those. And the actual site of the hotel from the rocks today looks a lot farther away than it does in this photograph. I'll let Mick talk about that, but a little bit more about the building. This is the first iteration of the Earl's Hotel. You'll notice the balcony on the second floor, which was entered to, there must look like there were two doors, one at the right end here, and then one in the middle. Later on, this balcony was taken off, and the story was that too many guests would go up there after dinner, and perhaps they were concerned about their safety. Perhaps there was too much noise. But later on, that balcony was taken off and absorbed into the rest of the building. There was also later on 2 wings built at either side of the hotel. The area in front of the hotel, between the rocks and the front porch of the hotel, was eventually sculpted out and made into a small lake, which actually was large enough to put rowboats on. And that lake, that depressed area in the along Fish Creek Road, is still very much in evidence in front of the condos that have been built there, even with the recent flooding. And we have some more recent photographs in our collection which show that lake. But this photograph shows a road coming up toward what is now the golf course, and then a road going right in front of the hotel building itself. Mick, do you want to talk a little bit about the change in camera lens that makes this photograph so difficult to retake?
Can't forget to unmute. Or it'll be a very boring talk. Yeah, you know, the challenge for people like us to try to do a book like this is, number one, figuring out where the original photographer was at when they took this picture. Our eyes get fooled by the perspective. And as many of you know, now we have very fancy cameras that are called zoom. They have zoom lenses. And I'll have to be honest with you that I'm actually not happy with this match, but it's the one that worked the best. And it worked the best because, number one, you don't have the hotel in the background to make a comparison. All you have are the 2 mountains on the back and then the rocks in the front. But, focal length, those of you that are photographers are known, I'm not going to get too technical except to say that focal length, the higher the value, the more it focuses and so on. And us, with our fancy cameras, we can stand at a particular place and take a picture and, just adjust the zoom value until we see what we like. These folks back then did not have that. They actually chose a place that was, best for their large tripods and large cameras, large format cameras and all their plates and everything. And they took the picture. When we went out to try to duplicate this effort, more often than not, I would come back home and put the pictures up on my screen and try to match them. And I was so disappointed. They just did not match. And that's because we used a zoom lens. So what I had to go do then is go back and, we talk about an experience that we had at Dollar Lake, Jim. We'd have to go back if we could, and I'd have to try to figure it out. But focal length compresses distance. And more often than not, it creates a problem. This particular example where we took this shot of Dollar Lake, Jim and I were allowed into a lady's room, even her bedroom, to where we thought the picture was taken from. And, I sheepishly came away and said, that's not where the picture was taken. But we were really grateful that the lady allowed us in after she queried us what we were doing outside her front yard taking pictures. And all I had to do was look behind me and saw the flat rock where the photographer had the best vantage point for putting his large camera and his large format, his tripod and everything. And there it was just that simple. But see, my first estimate was that it was taken from this lady's front yard, a front porch, and she kindly invited us in to take pictures. We actually met her one time, didn't we? And it was kind of funny. But we have to consider on projects like this what kind of cameras they used. Also, the large format camera goes into affecting what we call the focal length distance. And otherwise we'll go away and have to come back 3 or 4 more times to take the picture again. So I guess the bottom line that Jim was alluding to here is we knew that these rocks were them. They were nailed. We knew where the Estes Park Hotel was because there's a fireplace in the back that still remains after the fire of 1911. And I matched it with the pictures. And it came out okay, but it's not a good match, to be honest with you. But still, it worked great for the book.
Oh, it's still a great photograph regardless. Okay, on to number 2.
Sorry, can I stop you really quickly? We have a question. What were the dates on the lake in front of the hotel?
The date on the lake? I'm not sure, but I'm almost positive that it was there by about 1880. Because they built up various other things around the hotel. There were croquet and tennis courts and that kind of thing. So I think it came sooner rather than later.
Good question. And some of these too, I have my email at the end of, on the last slide for the presentation, because some of these we can't answer just on the spot. I mean, that's why I have Jim at these lectures, so I can just look to him for the majority of the questions. But sometimes we just can't remember all the dates in our heads. So feel free to follow up with any emails to me at the end. And if we don't get to answer everybody's questions too, feel free to email me so that we can just follow up with you. The next site I wanted to highlight was jumping downtown to the Prospect Inn. And I'll let Jim give some of the context for this one as well as before we look at the now one.
Sure. This site and its development goes back to about 1910, when a man, I don't know much about him, named William Miller, bought 2 lots from the Estes Park Town Company. That was the company that took Abner Sprague's survey drawings and divided them into lots and began to sell off those lots. Miller had a sister. In fact, he had 2 sisters. The younger sister was named Laura, and Laura opened up a bakery in what originally was the right-hand part of this particular building. It's the one here on the right-hand side, and you can see that it looks different, and indeed it was. It was a log cabin, and those logs appear to be very much in evidence on that porch. Along comes Laura's sister, Stella Miller. She decides she wants to open up a bakery, and she does. And pretty soon she's expanding her bakery, absorbing her sister's small building into this hotel. That was about 1915 or so. And by 1920, they've added the second story with 9 rooms. And those rooms are very much still up there today in that hotel. And it becomes then the Prospect Inn. This photograph was taken by Fred Clatworthy, one of our most famous early photographers. And you can tell, it's about 1920, you can tell it was probably taken in late winter or early spring. Here in Estes Park, you can't tell the difference between those 2 seasons because the women on the porch and sitting in those chairs seem to have coats on.
We have a question. Do we know who those women are on the porch?
No, we don't.
No. And that's one of the things I love, having old photos with people in it. It lends a lot of mystery when you don't know who they are. This is one where I wish we had that sign in our collection because that sign is awesome.
You know, I would guess that probably one of them is Stella Miller because it seems to me a very composed photograph. That is, they knew they were being taken. And here's the today photograph. The reason I mentioned Fred Clatworthy is because, as the original photographer, is because the images of Rocky Mountain National Park, the building that's been built below the hotel building, is where Eric Stensland has his studio. And of course, you know, Eric is one of our most preeminent contemporary photographs of Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park.
So
The
as I
architect
toggle
talk
back and
about,
forth between the two, you can see, you know, how that building was added in, the images of Rocky Mountain National Park. So you can't quite see the front of the hotel anymore. The windows on the second story match up still pretty well, and you can see that there was also something, you know, an additional window up on the roof. The other neat thing about this is if you look at the, I'll go back, if you look at the cabin that's on the far right, that's in the next property over, it actually matches up still with the log chinking of the building that it is today, which is another business. But this is located right downtown in Estes Park, just on the far side of Bond Park from Elkhorn Avenue. So very prominent place. The building has been worked on and just brought back to what its old look it looks like on the inside, and the outside was done really well too. And someone by Tom Wadowski was able to help us find this original photo as well.
Tom did a wonderful job of restoring the individual, the insides of the exterior of the original building. And as a matter of fact, if you go into what is today the shop on the right-hand side, he's left a portion of the original log wall of that original cabin in place. So you can see what it looked like, at least a portion of what it looked like many years ago.
We have another question. Sorry to go back really quickly. We have another question. Is that on the far left there, is that rock wall original?
Let's go back to the other photographs.
I don't think it is. I think
Oh.
the rock wall theme has been continued and carried on throughout the history of that site, but it's drastically larger and it's at a different angle. And when they added in that other building, I imagine there's a lot of reworking the front of that property. If you've gone into that building itself, you know, when it was the tea house or a seasoned bistro, you know, those steps are very steep. They're going up it because they've changed the grade of that site as well to match up for the road.
But I'll bet those rocks are all down there in the fill.
Probably, yeah. It's a good question. I like it when people are looking at the details as hard as we are, so that's good. We'll move further up Elkhorn Avenue here, our main street. I got to remember that some of our audience might not be as familiar with Estes Park as some of the locals that are watching right now. This is a little bit further up on Main Street, though. It's the National Park Hotel.
Well, this was built by a woman named Harriet Byerly, who came out. She was from Nebraska. She came out to a conference at the YMCA and literally stayed on. Originally, where this building now stands, Harriet opened up a tea room in around 1919 called the Pine Cone Tea Room. She eventually moved that tea room to the back of the lot and erected this National Park Hotel in its place. This has gone through a number of iterations and enlargements. What you're looking at is the hotel in its final stages. It was much smaller when it was originally built. And of course, you know, it went through a number of owners. I remember back in the 1970s, as many of you probably do, when it was a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum with all kinds of oddities being featured. And then, of course, today it's become a mall with 2 stories of small shops inside where the original hotel rooms were. This building is personally important to me because when my father came out to Estes Park in the early 1920s, he stayed at the Estes Park Hotel. And when I was growing up, I used to hear about Mrs. Byerly this and that, Mrs. Byerly that. And so I feel particularly close to the Estes Park Hotel and Mrs. Byerly.
Now, I love this photo too because when I first started working at the museum, I remember it was just one that it always stuck out to me. But one of the details, and it's hard to see in this scan of it, if you look at the front doors there, and then just to the right of them, in that window is a sign, and it actually says "Coming soon, Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum." On the back of the photo was a penciled note that somebody had written that said, you know, a picture of National Park Hotel before it was altered for Ripley's. And you never know whether to trust a note on the back of a photo or not. But the other thing that kind of validates that is if you look at the truck bed on the left of the photo, you can just make out the hand painted sign on the side of the truck, and it's Daniels and Son Builders, who were the ones who actually contracted to come in and modify the hotel and flip it. And then you can see between the two photos that that front patio has been removed at this point. And this is one of your photos, Mick. I don't know if you have anything to add besides the frustration of trees in Estes Park, but still how much we love all the trees we have.
Yeah, we do. In fact, we were talking about putting together a contest. One of the pictures in our first book, I think it's actually in the second book as well, there's a picture of a bungee cord. And we had to use a bungee cord to pull branches out of the way to make the match. Otherwise, all we'd have is pictures of leaves. We never did that, but if you come up with where that picture's at, give us an email. We'd love to hear from people that maybe spotted that. So the only other thing that I would say about this, because I know we got to march on, is if you notice the now picture, it doesn't have that front that is in the then picture. You can go back to that, Derek. And this is something that fooled us a lot. When we were trying to match nows to thens, we'd look for key points like corners in a case of a building, windows, and so on. If there's mountains in the background, we try to line ourselves up with that. But as you can see, that that second floor porch is now gone. The posts are still there, but it fooled us more than once. And, you know, things change.
You can also notice here the electrical light post. So you can see how Elkhorn Avenue was illuminated for a number of years. It's obviously much more attractive now without that kind of lamp post in place.
Yeah. And the one thing I was going to notice as we transition to the next one is actually looking at the shape of the roof line there, because that's something that is very prominent, even though it's changed a little bit. But this is from another site later on in the book, and we've listed all the sites up there in the left corner for all of the then photographs throughout this presentation. So this would actually be site 65, whereas that first one was 58. But again, if you're looking just to the right of center, you see the side of the National Park Hotel. And I pulled this from another section of the book, but I still wanted to focus on the National Park Hotel. One, I love this photo. It's very hard to even get to the details in the background once you notice that all the horses are riderless in the foreground. And that's why somebody's taken this photo, which is pretty cool. But when you start to look at the buildings and compare them then to now, that National Park Hotel and its roof line, it's still very prominent today, and you can still see it in the building there.
Derek, go back to that just a second.
Yeah.
No, the one you just showed us. Yeah. Notice up on the right-hand side, the HUPP for Huck, that's going to figure into our next story.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's not the Huck Hotel. Go ahead.
And the only thing I'll mention about this, going away from the National Park Hotel, with those riderless horses, a lot of people know the stories, but a lot of people don't know the story of why this was possible. And what's so neat about our history is you used to be able to do everything downtown. And of course, when you have the hotels there, they had everything else down there. So all of your restaurants would be down there, your laundry would be down there. Laundries would be down there, you know, everything right there at your fingertips. Well, they also had a ton of stables down there. And the story that I was always told by some people who've been here for a while is people would come in, they would actually go to a livery, get their horses, go on a horse ride for the day, and then they'd get dropped off at whatever hotel they were staying at or restaurant. And you could literally just slap the horse on the rump and it knew where it was going to be fed. So it would run back to the livery. And we have a couple of photos like this with riderless horses running down the street with traffic moving. And all of them I love are titled Rush Hour in Estes Park.
One more thing about this photograph, and it's amazing what you look at when you see things 3, 4, 5 times. One is the absence of the lamppost that we saw in the previous photograph. And two, notice the two strings of electrical light bulbs across the street. The town fathers in the 1920s thought that was a great addition to downtown life. And you'll notice that now, I think there are at least three strings. There's one further on up the street. But when you came into Estes Park at night, those light bulbs strung across the street would be part of the scene.
That's pretty funny. They have like a back patio feel.
Yeah.
All right, we'll dive into the next one. And this is going to be the two sites together, Jim. So, so the story can be told a little smoother, I guess, between the Hupp Hotel, Manford Hotel, Estes Park.
Right. Shall I dive in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, this was in its original iteration. This is taken in 1913 when what was originally called the Hupp Hotel, after its builder, Josephine Hupp. And Josephine Hupp is someone who we really should know more about and celebrate, because she was one of Estes Park's pioneer women in terms of helping develop the town. At one time, she owned at least 3 hotels on Elkhorn Avenue. In any event, in 1906, she begins the building of this hotel. It's opened in 1907. And it looks, and she calls it the Hupp Hotel after herself. Now, if you go to the now photograph, we can point out some obvious changes that have taken place between its current iteration as the Indian Village. Notice, for example, that the original hotel was just about as long as that Indian Village sign. And on the left-hand side, it has all been added afterwards. And there was also clearly an open deck up there, as there was a lower deck, lower porch as well, much as there was in the earlier picture of the Dunraven Hotel. But the doorway is still in the same place, and the other buildings are still in the same place, and the roof line is very much the same. She didn't own that very long. As I say, she sold it, and by 1913, it had been renamed the Estes Park Hotel, in part because she built this building across the street. This was built and opened by a man named John Manford. Manford Avenue is named after him. And it was built and opened in 1908. He didn't own it very long. He sold it to Josephine Hupp, and then she sold her building, which she later bought back. But when she bought this building, she renamed it the Hupp Annex, and it was the Hupp Annex for a number of years. So we had the Hupp Hotel, we had the Hupp Annex Hotel, and depending on what you were looking at, you couldn't tell the one from the other. This is rather interesting for a number of reasons. One, again, notice the porches on the second floor as well as the first floor. And notice on the right-hand side, there were a number of cabins going up that lot to the left. But the corner looks very much today like it looked back then. You want to go to the now photograph? Go ahead.
Before I toggle to the now one, the one thing I wanted to point out is we actually have something that we slipped in before we get to the now one, because we have the Hupp Hotel, the Hupp Annex, which eventually becomes more popular, and the Hupp Hotel goes away. So then the Hupp Annex becomes the Hupp Hotel. It's all very confusing. This is it later on by another photographer, Sanborn, who comes into town. And it's great because it's almost at the same angle as the original photograph. So sometimes, even though Mick and I are going out reshooting these places, some people have done that in the past for us already. And it's very funny too, because then when you get into the now photo, which captures almost the exact same angle, it's all because you're just standing right on the street corner. And it's just a matter of taking a step to the left or the right, and you're not even out in traffic for any of these.
Derek, go back to the previous photograph for a second. Look at the rear look at the building on the far left-hand side, which has a car in it. That's John Cleeve's old house. John Cleeve was the postmaster. That house stood exactly where the current Manford Hotel or the Hupp Hotel stood at the corner. And when Manford bought the property to build the hotel, he moved John Cleeve's house to the rear of the property where it sat for many years. It sat there until the 1940s when it disappeared. Now, there's an article in the Trail says that it was moved out to the power plant to be used for housing out there. But Derek and I have not been able to trace where it went or even if it got to that particular site. But that's the only modern 1930s photograph of the John Hupp house, of the postmaster's house, the John Cleeve house. But that's what that building is to the rear of that lot. And again, until we saw this on a larger screen, I really hadn't paid much attention to that building. But it's another piece of history.
Yeah, and this iteration, this photo here, you can see that the front facade and part of the side has also been changed to stucco. Whereas again, going towards the back of the lot, you can still see that siding from the original. And then what's funny is you would think that that would be the, you know, the look that it kept today. And really that siding, this one's hard to see because it's a, you know, a scan of a photograph from the book, but you can still see the siding on the building, and it's gone back, except the portion of it still on the right-hand side, as we're looking at it, is still covered in stucco.
And the porch is still there.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm gonna jump in here. We've got a couple of questions.
Let's hear.
Does Josie Hupp come from the family that had the homestead in Upper Beaver Meadows and sold to Peter Hondius? And then the second question, what's the gazebo above the Hupp Hotel in the Sanborn postcard?
The answer to the first question is yes, but it's a relationship that would take me a long time to actually put together. But yes, that was the Hupp family, pioneer family. About the gazebo, Derek, do you know?
I was looking at you. Couldn't you tell?
Yeah, I could tell, but I couldn't. I have no answer for it.
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. If anybody has any information of or an inkling of what that is, I'd love to hear it. At this point in time, of course, you have what is now Bighorn Avenue. It used to be Anderson Avenue, going up, and Wonderview wouldn't have been established at this time, but you still have the neighborhood up behind town. I see that gazebo in a lot of photos. I'm sure that it's on private property when we're looking at it. I don't know what if that's all that it was, and that's it, or it served another purpose as a private residence. But yeah, I'd love to learn more about it because it's very prominent, especially in all of the panoramas that we have of downtown, and it's always kind of just lingering back there.
There were a number early of those little gazebos. I think of the one that Fred Clatworthy had over on Sightworthy Street that collapsed. We see that in a number of photographs. So this was not the only one. It was, I guess, part of the fashionable way of taking the air on a summer evening, build yourself a gazebo and go out and sit and have a cocktail.
Yeah. All right. One of our most famous.
Well, this is obviously the Stanley Hotel. We know it was completed in 1909 and opened, so this is about 1908 with the hotel under construction. And I really like the photograph because it shows the hotel as a work in progress. Mick, do you want to show us the photograph of the retake photograph as it appeared in the 2008 book, and then talk about your retake of this?
You have that there, Derek?
Yeah, this is yours here from
This is yours.
the first edition.
Okay. Yeah, my display isn't updating as fast as you guys. So assuming that I'm looking at the right one from the 2006 edition, you know, obviously the first thing I wanted to do is find the exact place where the photo was taken from. And again, one of those anecdotes where we were having a lot of fun, maybe too much fun, but there was times that I think both Jim and Carrie wanted to murder me. But I would be too exact. I'm an engineer as by training and by background, so I'd try to be too exact. But the thing about this picture to note that I know Jim is alluding to with the original then picture is that we pretty much nailed the time of day. Look at the shadows. And
on the dormers.
on the dormers. And it gave me the idea that we should go back and start retaking all these pictures with an approximate equivalent time of day. That idea wasn't too popular, right, Jim?
Yeah.
And so I never mentioned it again. But anyways, this is my first match, and then Derek matched it up as well.
Yeah, and then for the new edition, we wanted to do it again. I'm not an engineer by trade. I'm just trying to get the right season in mind. But we were able to go up there again and retake it. And so, one thing I try to stress too, we always talk about then and now, but as history and is a funny thing, and as time passes, everything that's now eventually will become then. And so it's fun to compare the three of these just to see the little changes. And we all know, especially those of us who've been living in town here the past couple of years, seeing what improvements are happening to that property. And that's why it was important to go out when we decided to redo the book, is to capture them now, because so much has changed. And especially they're not affecting these as we focus on lodges too much today, but some of the other ones, just because of the 2013 flood, we had to go out and retake a lot.
Here's a question for you, Derek, and maybe Mick as well. On the modern photographs to the right of the cupola on top of that hotel is another structure. Do you know what that is?
Up on the roof line?
Yep.
I know what it is.
You do you?
I do know that one.
Okay. Mick, do you?
No, I don't.
We're just going to put you right on spot since we can't do it to audience members. I guess we could ask them.
Yeah, we could ask them to give Michaela the answers, and we'll see how many know the answer, and we can check back later.
All right. See who knows the answer. I'll toggle back and forth between them.
Okay.
Somebody did say something.
Yeah, I saw some of the questions pop up. I will say you can't see it in the early one.
And notice that it's not there in the building under construction, so it was added later on.
Now, the bad thing about Jim pointing that out too is now every time you look at the Stanley, you're going to see that feature.
Yeah, you're right. Hey, Mick, by the way, is your sound up as far as it can go? Because I'm hearing Derek better than I hear you.
I will look at that and try to adjust it. Thanks.
Okay, people were putting it out there. Elevator shaft.
Yep, we've got 3 elevator votes.
Okay, that's exactly right.
Good job. And the attempt to modernize it, it was put in the elevator there. Okay.
Okay. We could talk all day about the Stanley Hotel, but let's move on. This is, of course, the Elkhorn Lodge, which has been in the news recently, under the hopes that it will be redeveloped with that central lodge building, the 1900 lodge building, being retained and I guess retrofitted, improve the facade. Anyway, this photograph is interesting for any number of reasons. The Elkhorn Lodge goes back to about 1877. It may say 1874 on the sign at the entryway, but it's probably 1877. And the original lodge building is the one here on the right-hand side that has the 3 cars in front of it. The building in back that we're looking at was added in 1900s, of course, to add more capacity. And to the left of that, behind the hotel building, is the original Estes Park Schoolhouse from the 1890s. So this is a really great photograph. What else, Derek, needs to be talked about here? Old Man Mountain, of course, in the rear.
Yeah. This would have been taken from what is now known as the Coach House or the casino. It kind of has a couple of different names. It's actually up on the patio there. The only other thing while we're on this then photo to mention is this is the most well-documented lodge that we have in our photograph collection. We have so many photos of this. Everybody always thinks it'll be the Stanley Hotel. And we have a much larger collection of historic images of Elkhorn Lodge than we do of any other lodge in Estes Park. Oh, and I do love too, real quick in the foreground, they are playing a game of baseball here.
Yes.
They entertained any sport you could think of, I feel like they were doing over there. We even have historic footage of them playing musical chairs, but all the participants are on horseback, going around the circle of chairs. Donkey races, they have baseball, they're doing tennis, the golf course, of course, all of those things. So this is a cool one where, and it kind of puts that property in scale too, of them playing some baseball right outside in the front area there.
And some of those baseball games were written up in the contemporary newspapers. Yeah. I might add one more thing. One of the things that I like to do is to debunk false stories. And the one that comes to mind in terms of the Elkhorn Lodge has to do with the building on the hillside, which you cannot see here, called the Chapel. And I noticed that in a write-up about the current owner's plans for remodeling, they talk about the chapel as Estes Park's first church. It was not. That building was built as a cottage, and I believe it was called the Chapel because its builder was the first owner of this property, William McCreary, who was a Presbyterian minister. And I believe that was his cottage. If you go inside, there's a fairly good size open parlor in front and then 2 bedrooms in the back. The idea that that ever served as a church is simply, I think, having to do with the fact that its owner was a minister. So there's one more for correcting some of the myths of history.
And then the things to notice, of course, you know, the same window on the original lodge, which is right behind those 2 cars on the right. You can still see the what was used as Estes Park's first schoolhouse. It wasn't built to be a schoolhouse. It was a cabin that was converted into the schoolhouse, but it's over there on the left of the main lodge.
I believe they plan on saving that as well, which would be great.
Yeah, and just a complete random thing. If you look at the shadow on the bottom left corner, I did almost go out at the same time and capture it again. But I wasn't as diligent as Mick is with his.
Okay, the Estes Park Chalet, my goodness. What a story, what a history this building has had, including the 2 fires. One that destroyed the left-hand side in the 1970s, and then of course the fire in 2018, which took out the historic and original middle part of that building. This goes back to, dates back to about 1918. There was a small hotel built below called the Rockdale Cottages, built by a couple of guys named Jones and Nevins. That cottage was purchased in 1915 and then moved up to the hill, and the rest of the hotel, the larger hotel we know as the Estes Park Chalet, Mary's Lake Lodge, was built around that original structure. It passed through a number of hands and into the hands ultimately of a man named Roe Emery. And Roe Emery was the transportation czar of Estes Park, who pioneered the Great Circle tours, which began in Denver at the railroad station. People came up to Estes Park then in buses, touring cars like the ones you see in this photograph to the right, then went up and over the new Fall River Road to into Middle Park, stopped at the Grand Lake Lodge, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then exited by way of Berthoud Pass and went back to Denver, where the whole tour began. But this is the Estes Park Chalets that has existed probably in the late 1920s, early 1930s.
And this is when I scanned our then photo from the book. You can see the crease there. It's a larger panorama. So it definitely appears much better in the book itself. It's one that we wanted to be sure to capture and put in the book. But also we had already actually submitted our photo of the what's now Mary's Lake Lodge. And after the fire took place there in 2018, Jim called me up and said, "How quick do you think you can go back up? Do you remember where you stood the first time? And can you reshoot it?" And so I went back up there and reshot it so that we could actually capture how that middle section burned. And of course, now that entire section has been removed. And, it's just one of those things to help document history that much further.
And of course, we can't see the building for all the condos in front, but that's progress.
But you can see how in the background on Twin Sisters, how we matched up the peaks really, really well.
Yep. Now you did a good job on that one.
Yeah, and this one's just further up the road here. And,
sure, this is what was known as Ferguson's Resort, or the Highlands Hotel. Horace Ferguson was very proud of his Scottish heritage, and he even claimed that he was descended from King Fergus, the mythical original Scottish king. He came to Estes Park in 1875, found land that the Earl of Dunraven had not claimed as his own, found a small pond, which is still there on Mary's Lake Road, and built this resort around that pond. The pond is behind the building on the left-hand side of the photograph. This is looking back towards the lower part of Prospect Mountain. But one of the reasons that we like this photograph so much is it shows the house that William Hallett built, his house, which he named. What was Hallett's house named?
Viewed as the Hallett House.
Edgemont.
Oh, Edgemont, yes.
He built it in 1878. He and Ferguson are very good friends, and so that original house, as built, had no kitchen to speak of, because Hallett would take his meals down with Horace Ferguson at his resort. And so it was a combination of tent houses and cabins. And here's the retake of this.
Yeah, this was mixed shot.
Yeah.
I was really excited about this shot, and Jim, you talked about places that are most to you.
The present Mary's Lake Road is a creature of the 1930s. The original road that led to the down to the valley, down to the intersection at the bottom of Mary's Lake Road. That road came in front of this area here. In fact, we're looking at the road in the foreground of this particular photograph. And it made the trip up that hill, up what they call Highlands Hill, a lot more difficult than it is today.
Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yeah, you can see the original road is probably this very close to the driveway in the front part of this contemporary photograph.
By the way, Hallett's house is still there. It's a dentist's office.
Yep.
When I first started looking for this, because this is one of the first few sites that we did for the first edition, I was really excited that I went here all by myself, because I didn't consider myself as experienced as as Jim and Carrie, but I was able to find the foundation of some of these houses, and that was exciting to me. And so I knew exactly, where some of these other places were at. This is a drainage for for water after it rains pretty heavy up there. But we did good nailing that shot. One of my favorite shots is one of the ones that's taken looking south. This one is looking east towards Prospect Mountain, but we chose it because it had more of the features of the buildings.
Speaking of those foundations, go back to the then photograph. If you go down here to the left-hand side of the left-hand side, you'll see what looks to be 3 structures. The third one over has a fireplace, which you can make out if you look at it carefully. It's the footing of that fireplace, which is still there out there in the meadow.
Very cool. So I realize we're coming up on our time here. This seems to happen.
If anybody has to leave because we're too long-winded, they should feel free to do so, right?
Yeah, feel free, everybody. We want to respect your time. It's a lot easier just to click leave than to have to get up in front of all of us and think we're going to actually call you out on it. We do have this one here is going to be Meeker Park, because we did decide for this edition to explore some of the highways getting to Estes Park, because that's part of the adventure of being in Estes Park. And then after that, we're going to have a couple of them that are in the park, and then we'll end it up with Grand Lake Lodge. So I think we still have about 4 more sites, if I remember correctly.
No, I think that's right. And I kind of wanted this to be in the photograph because it's in the Tahosa Valley, and it was the Tahosa Valley that I came as a kid in 1946, 1947. So this was the area of Estes Park that I came to know the best, and Meeker Park Lodge was there. Although back then it was relatively new. It was built between 1930 and 1935 by the Deaver family, and the Deaver family still owns the lodge today, the descendants of the original builders. But it looks today very much like it looked when I was a kid and used to, after a horseback ride or a hike down in Wild Basin, come up to that little store and get ice cream or a can of Coke.
This is one of those we probably could have used mixed bungee cord on. For
Yes.
that branch right in the middle.
Well, you were on top of the museum van when you took this photograph.
Yeah, we couldn't get the right angle on it. It was extremely difficult, and I love reshooting old log cabins because you can take the lines from those logs and almost draw, like get the exact perspective of everything. It's very interesting. But the more we looked at it, when you look at the foreground here, this person is actually up on a hill, because you can see that they're kind of standing on a berm. And then there's a rock there. The rock no longer exists. The berm no longer exists because they expanded that highway. I was almost convinced that that little tree that's growing in the right-hand corner of the then photograph is the one that is now blocking our view. But because we didn't have a berm and we were only at street level, the only way I could get up higher was to crawl on top of the roof of our brand new museum van.
I shouldn't be telling those stories on you, should I?
Yeah. And now we'll go into the park, starting with Fall River Lodge.
Yeah, this is on Old Fall River Road. This is Fall River Lodge. It was built and opened in 1915 in time for the dedication of the park. As a matter of fact, in some of those early dedication photographs, before the trees grew up, you could actually see the building of this hotel in the distance. Like so many of the lodges in the park, this was built by Dan and Minnie March. It was enlarged over the years. The dining room is on the left-hand side. That was a late addition. So the original building was much smaller. And you can still find the location today because of that rock in the lower right-hand side of the photograph, which marks the entryway to the Here it is in the now photograph. And that hotel, by the way, and Derek can talk about this as well, had a major pond in front of it and a big building called the Pavilion, which was the recreation hall. So the whole resort was a lot larger than the existing building you see in the photograph now. And the whole area to the left-hand side, which you see as a bunch of trees in a depression as you go by on the way up Old Fall River Road, was the lake that stood in front of the recreation hall, stood in front of the pavilion.
Yeah, and I'll share that one next with that view. Mick, this is one of your photographs of the now. And I know that the mountains, if everybody looks as I toggle back and forth, if you look at the mountains themselves, you can see they match up perfectly, tree line, everything. The foreground's tweaked a little bit because you know the rock moves, but if you want to share some of that, Mick. Because
Well, again,
the rock is there.
One of the times when I almost lost my life by trying to be too exact, but that's all I'll say.
So the rock you can see here is almost in the middle of the page where the parking lot is, under at the base of those two tall trees, just right to that Winnebago that's captured in the photo.
Mick was really good at capturing these now photographs. He would take what seemed hours to get the match, but he got it exactly right. And I've told the story before about Mick getting tired of hearing me say, "Take the damn photograph." So moving on, this is the inside of the Fall River Lodge, and we're indebted. There are a number of interior photographs in the new book, and we're indebted to Bobby Heisterkamp and her wonderful postcard collection for a number of these interior views. But this is great, and to see it blown up in a larger than postcard size is great, because you see just the extent of that lobby. And they're typical of the lobbies of these earlier lodges, with rugs on the floor and headed mounts of animals on the walls. And of course they had electrical lighting, the illumination. And at the front, this looks like the front desk, and obviously it's a glass case, and there are objects souvenirs to buy there, as well as looks like a postcard rack behind the woman.
Yeah, and one of the other interiors we'll see will be Stead's Lodge. But we thought it was a good opportunity to have some of these within the new edition of the book, because it brings these buildings more to life and shows you how they were used and have that human presence in them. And really, the interiors compared to some of the exteriors are shocking to some people. This is the different angle that Jim was talking about, where you're looking now at the front of the lodge there to the right. And you have the pond, of course, in the foreground, which you can even see the bridge going over the water that they're bringing in there off of Fall River. And then the building on the left, which I've heard some people that had stayed there at the time were always calling it the boathouse, which is weird to think of a boathouse in Rocky Mountain National Park.
And that big rock to the right is still very much in evidence.
Yeah, so this was a tough one to match up for myself. I took the now one. I've always loved the then photo. It does make sense. And if you look at the mountains again in the background, especially to the right there, where there's an edge of a mountain and then the rock alpine of another mountain just behind it, it matched up really well. I did actually find that rock, and you can see it right off the road when you're pulling back there, which is great. I got very frustrated with this at first, and then the more I thought about how there's just this pit and all these trees growing right there and blocking the view, of course it makes total sense, because that's where they have all this water sitting there year after year. It's enriching the soil, all that good stuff. It's perfect for plant growth. So once they get rid of the lodge later on and get rid of all of those buildings, it's only going to be natural for these trees to just skyrocket right out of where that pond used to be.
Guys, we've got a couple of questions. Can I hop in?
Right.
So what happened to this lodge in particular?
It was raised by the park.
Yeah, 1946.
Okay. Is there a site map included in the book?
Yes. Yeah, we definitely wanted to create a site map. I should always start these programs with the disclaimer though. Even with the site map and the good directions on how to find these sites, some of them are on private property. We did always ask for permission. Some of them in the park, especially when they're above tree line that we went to, we try to stay on trail as much as possible because we don't want to be the ones contributing to any of the damage that takes place up there. So you still want to be careful with how you're treating these areas if you do try to find them. But I highly encourage people to go out and find these spots. It's half the fun of it. And you learn so much. You don't even have to know the history of the site specifically. You learn so much, and you find some little remains here and there, and it's a lot of fun. And especially for local people who have a lot of visitors coming in, it's a fun way to entertain your guests.
Well, and while you have this photograph, the central part with those trees on the mound between the pavilion and the lodge, that's still very much in evidence. So if you go up the hillside, that was a picnic area, and it still is. There's a picnic table up there on the
Yep.
top, and you can just imagine sitting up there what it must have been looking down upon the water and upon the recreation building.
Yeah.
One more question. What year did electric lighting come to Estes Park?
Well, the 1909, because that was the year that the Mr. Stanley built the power plant on Fall River to power his hotel.
Which we now operate as a seasonal museum as well.
Right.
Now, the neat thing about Fall River Lodge is they actually had their own generator coming off the Roaring River, the McKelvey.
Did.
It no longer exists, of course, after the Long Lake flood. And I'm not sure of the exact history of it, but we did, I think in our collection, we have an interior shot of that small hydro generator.
And I think they shared the power. They shared the power with Horseshoe Park Inn.
Yeah. Which will be our next site. I'm going to have some movement on my end while Jim explains this site, just because I'm going to have a guest presenter take my place for this one. So go ahead, Jim.
So I'll talk a little bit how it began. It began as a homestead by a fellow named Richmond, Edward Richmond, who was happened to be a blacksmith early on. He built so he has his homestead. He homesteaded in 1896, and he built a homestead cabin there. And then gradually it was enlarged to become the Horseshoe Inn. Originally, the owner of the property, the second owner, a man named William Ashton, actually had some conversations with Frank Lloyd Wright about designing a Frank Lloyd Wright-esque building as the Horseshoe Inn. That didn't happen. Instead, a more traditional building was put in its place. And with that, I will turn it over to our special guest and helper. She'll tell us how she helped to take the now photograph.
Yeah, so this is my daughter, Leela. She is now 9 years old. So this took place a couple of years ago, but I needed some help in the long run. So I'm going to have her tell the story real quick here.
So, I had a day off of school, and so Dad said I could come help him take the photo. Well, come with him to get to the spot. And so we went, and my dad was trying to get the photo, but we couldn't get high enough. And so we finally figured out that there was a pond there, and as you can see in the photo on the bottom there's some water. So there's a pond there. And so so then he was like, well, maybe if you go on my shoulders, we can get it. So I got on his shoulders, and we got it. It was basically at the right height. We couldn't go any higher because there were some aspen trees there that weren't there before. And so you can see some of the leaves in the top of the photo. But so we're mostly trying to match up these two trees and then this one. this like dead tree over here, and the mountains. So the mountain's a little bit farther back there.
Yeah, because of the lens and what
Yeah.
Mick was describing earlier.
But so you can see the two trees here, and then
Whoops. Tell them what happened to the tree if you walk on the trail.
so this one, but right here, you can see it's dead, but it's not in this one. So if you walk farther back on this trail back here, you can actually see the tree that it fell down, and it fell down and is now rotting away. And then
You can tell them there's a rock to the left.
there's a rock to the left, right here,
It's sitting in the middle ground.
that's sitting in the middle ground. And then if you look, we actually matched that up too. So yeah, it's pretty fun. It was a fun one to take. But
Okay. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Leela. Thanks.
Bravo. And I hadn't even noticed that rock until she mentioned it. Every time we do this, I see something new. And she's right about that tree. It is up there, or was up there relatively recently. Just like the Fall River Lodge, the Ashtons decided they needed to put a lake in front of the hotel. And so or beside the hotel. So that's exactly what they did. And this path in the foreground of the now photograph is actually the road that went back down toward the livery for the horseshoe parking. Okay.
We have one more question.
Yep.
Does anyone want to comment on the Park Service project that cleared the remaining lodges from Rocky Mountain National Park?
Say that again.
Does anyone want to comment on the Park Service project that cleared the remaining lodges from Rocky Mountain National Park?
What? You mean whether we approve of it or what had happened?
Or, whatever your thoughts are.
Well,
If you have any you wish to share.
Yeah, well, yes. Over the years, I've given a lot of tours out in the park, and one of the questions I invariably get is, isn't it too bad that those old lodges weren't there? Because for generations, for many people, thousands of people, they constituted what people would talk about as the Rocky Mountain Park experience, to be able to live inside the park and actually go out and be able to hike and that kind of thing and come back at night and stay in the park. And my response is twofold. The first is that you have to realize that these buildings were built in a hurry, and that they were built for a 90-day season. The season in the park was much shorter than it is today. In fact, in the beginning, the park didn't open until June, and it closed around the 1st of October. So you couldn't even get into the park, let alone stay there. And so by the 1930s, when the National Park Service began to have money to be able to purchase these old lodges, there was a lot of deferred maintenance work that needed to be done. And the owners simply weren't making enough money to keep up with the maintenance that needed to go on. Plus the fact that the national park, then as now, was going increasingly small in terms of the capacity, the ability to allow the wildlife to have appropriate area. And so to turn the park back to the way it looked before these buildings came into place became a priority for the National Park Service. So yes, in one sense, it's too bad. These castles of wood are no longer there, but the park looks much like it did before these buildings came. And so I think it's a bittersweet kind of answer. It's too bad that they're gone in one sense, but on the other, there was probably no way to sustain them from an economic point of view.
Yeah, I wouldn't have anything to add. I don't know if you want to comment, Mick.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. This is a fun one I thought that we would throw in, just because so many people that I talk to remember this this specific spot in the park, and whether they went to this hotel or not, got to stay there. But it seems like there are so many people that reminisce on going up the tower, which has a nice sign there in front of it saying "Free Tower."
Well, the reason why so many people remember it is because it's obviously on Trail Ridge Road. So people went by it. Uh, it sits in a strategic area, obviously connecting a marine park with the Horseshoe Park, and that was precisely the problem. It began as a very small refreshment stand about 1917, established by a man named Orville Bechtel. And for a time, actually, there was a ski run behind the building, or a bobsled run. Over time, particularly when it was purchased by the Schubert family, those whole four corners were occupied with buildings, including the restaurant and this fire tower and cottages. There was a livery and gas station, and it became a traffic nightmare for the National Park Service. So from the 1930s on, until it was finally purchased and the buildings were taken out, that would have been in the early 1960s, there were endless negotiations with the family to try to purchase that property. So it was in its time, it was obviously a major tourist attraction. For the Park Service, it was nothing but a headache.
And in reshooting it, it was really just knowing kind of where it sat, and then lining up the background and the Deer Mountain in the background there.
Almost all the historic photographs we have focus on these buildings on this side of the road. But as I say, it's too bad because there were buildings on all four of those corners.
I'll just ask real quick. Somebody typed, I stayed at Deer Ridge Chalet several times as a child, and I'm curious. I tried to answer you, I couldn't. But do you have any pictures when you stayed there? We would love to see some.
All right, now we're in Moraine Park. This is Stead's Ranch, or the beginning of Stead's Ranch, which began as Abner Sprague's hotel, Sprague's Ranch and Lodge. This photograph was taken by Fred Clatworthy. Isn't that Fred Clatworthy's wife or relative or something in the photograph there? Or not? Anyway, the Spragues came to own about 900 not 900, close to 700 acres of land all the way along Moraine Park. What began as a homestead cottage close to a spring, and the spring is still very much evidenced on that moraine hillside, turned into a small resort. In 1900, Abner Sprague took James Stead in as a partner, and together they built this central lodge building, which you can see in the center of the photograph with its pile of elkhorns in front. The partnership didn't go very well, and in 1904, Sprague sold out to Stead for about $25,000 and exited the hotel business, the hospitality business entirely. Went down to Loveland, where he opened up an engineering and surveying office. And then in 1908, came back up into Glacier Basin and built and opened and expanded Sprague's Lodge. So the presence of Sprague Lake, Sprague Lodge, as well as Sprague's Resort here in Moraine Park is very much an important part of the history of Rocky Mountain National Park. And that's what we're looking at here. Today, you can find that central rock. It's very much in evidence. But the Park Service purchased the Stead's Ranch in 1972 from Sprague's nephew, a man named Edgar Stouffer, for $750,000. He had purchased it from the Steads back in 1950, 12 years earlier, for $90,000. So he made a good profit on the deal. And then the Park Service came in and took out all the buildings. Derek, do you have some comments?
Well, this was Mick's photo. He must have had somebody go back down there and sit in that same spot.
That's Carrie. She's our original partner, right? Isn't that
Right,
Carrie
so-
in the photograph?
Gary.
So it looks like somebody's always been sitting there throughout the history.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then I'll let Mick talk about what's that?
we tried to do that whenever possible to have people back in the photographs.
Definitely makes it more fun.
Do you have the picture of the ladies on the rock? Did you put that in?
We don't have that one in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, that one would have been closer down where that big rock is, and it's a pretty neat one. The only thing I can say that this site has changed today because that huge tree right in the middle of the photo has now fallen over. So if you go down there today, don't use that as your benchmark unless you're looking for it fallen over. And that's where you can end up starting to find some of the remains of the building down there and the road itself. But yeah, this one, you nailed that background shot for sure. I mean, it's the exact location. It's great.
So Derek, I know we're way over time, but I sent you an email with a picture of the ghost of the ladies on the rock. Can you put that up or not? Is that too hard?
I'll see if I can. Here's the interior of the lodge as well. That again, we relied on Bobby Heisterkamp for those postcards. Let me see if I can do that. We have one last site here on the slideshow.
Oh yeah, this is Grand Lake Lodge. This goes back to the early 1920s. I think 1920 is exactly the date. It was built in anticipation of the completion of Fall River Road up and over the Continental Divide by a man named A.D. Lewis. Lewis was also for a time the owner of Mary's Lake Lodge, or the Estes Park Chalet. It too became a property of Roe Emery, who at one time not only owned the Stanley Hotel, but he owned the Grand Lake Lodge and he owned the Estes Park Chalet and used them as the facilities for his Grand Circle tours between Denver, Rocky Mountain National Park, and then back to Denver. And this is obviously still a landmark overlooking Grand Lake. Unfortunately, the trees that have grown up in front make it impossible to see the exterior of the building as it existed back in 1920, but it hasn't changed much in reality.
And it is fun that they
Stairs are still in place going up.
it's fun that they still have these historic vehicles there too.
Yep, yep, yep. And you can see the original photograph. In the original photograph, they're selling, they're still serving the trout dinners at Grand Lake Lodge.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can see,
Trout and chicken.
yeah, down in the bottom right corner there.
Yep, yep.
So that's what we had for everybody today. Like I said, I want to be sure to put my email address up there in case we can't answer everybody's questions. If you have any questions about getting the book, you can email me or the administrative assistant for the Museum Friends group, and that's Elaine Hunt Downey. So there's her address as well. I know, yeah, we have another poll to be taken here. And if you do have any questions and you have a little extra time to stick around, please go ahead and post those up there. And I'll close out my slideshow here in a minute, see if I can pull up that ghost image of yours, Mick.
And we're very new at these Zoom presentations. So if you have suggestions on how we can improve them for the future, because I think they're here to stay for the foreseeable future, please let us know and we'll certainly take them into account. And we miss not seeing you all in presence, because that itself is one of the fun things about doing these presentations, is actually to have a chance to interact with a live audience.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Do we have any questions?
Not right now. We're getting a lot of thank yous. Thank you all for joining us.
Absolutely.
By the way, to Randall M., I think Harry, if you wouldn't mind, you said you did have pictures when you stayed at the Deer Ridge Lodge. If you wouldn't mind sending some of them in, email them to Derek or to Michaela. We'd love to see them.
All right, any final votes? I'll end the poll.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and try and pull up this ghost image real quick that Mick sent me. I'm opening it in Photoshop, which is appropriate because usually what we're doing when we overlay these is to go ahead and use Photoshop itself. And oh, let's see this. Okay, that's a good one to know.
And I've recorded all the answers, so.
Yeah. I
This
won't
will-
just sit here in silence and study it then. But what you could see here is I have Photoshop opened and it's one of Mick's, it's two photos, but they're overlaid. So Mick, if you want to just describe what's going on here, because a lot of people are so interested in the process itself. And this is when, you know, you've been out all day taking photographs, you get back to your office and you sit down and you're hoping that some of them turn out, hopefully all of them. And you start matching them up with this ghost overlay. So go
So
ahead.
this is how we match them up. We use Photoshop, and with Photoshop, you can overlay two layers. You put them both on one new level layer, and you can drag one layer around and expand it or compress it if you know your picture is too big. You try to match up the points. This is the picture of that's in our book on page 330 and 331. This is how I matched it up, and this is what we call a ghost. As you can see there to the far left, the lady in the black dress and the other lady standing by the rock, you know, told me that I was close. If you look at in the distance at the mountains, just to the left of that large tree, you can see that I really wasn't in the same place. But the important thing was to match up, you know, the ladies on the rocks and so on. By the way, that large tree that I just mentioned on the right is the one that Derek mentioned that is no longer there. So we were on the other side of that tree taking this picture. So I thought it'd be interesting.
This is looking up the hill. The other photograph was looking down the hill.
Yeah,
That's correct.
And the reason for the importance of this photograph is the building in the center. That's the original homestead cabin of Abner Sprague. That's what brought them to this particular place. And in front of that homestead cabin is the spring on the hillside, which if you go out there today, you can find very easily, which is still flowing very freely in all seasons down the hill.
yeah, you definitely want to be careful walking around out there because it flows a little more sometimes than other times, and you can be ankle deep before you know it.
All right. Awesome.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Next one. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.